Rebecca Miller was the kind of person everyone seemed to admire. At 30, she had built a reputation as one of the most dedicated elementary school teachers in Denver, Colorado. Parents sang her praises at PTA meetings, colleagues turned to her for advice, and her students adored her. Her bright, cheerful classroom was often the first to be featured in the school's newsletters. With its carefully crafted bulletin boards, innovative lesson plans, and a warmth that reflected Rebecca's personality. But behind the accolades and the polished exterior, Rebecca was silently struggling. She lived in a small, cozy apartment not far from her school, a space filled with remnants of her devotion to teaching. Stacks of graded papers and lesson planning binders were scattered on the dining table. Student art projects were pinned to the walls, evidence of her commitment to nurturing creativity in her classroom. Her bookshelves were packed with self-help titles she never had time to finish, many of them with bookmarks stuck halfway through. Rebecca's days started early and ended late. She would wake up before sunrise, meticulously plan her outfit for the day, and rush out the door with a granola bar and coffee in hand. By the time she reached the school, her mental checklist was already racing. Lessons to refine, parents to email, and papers to grade. She spent hours creating detailed lesson plans, ensuring every activity was engaging and perfectly aligned with curriculum standards. Her dedication didn't stop when the school day ended. After dismissing her students, Rebecca stayed late into the evening, catching up on grading, organizing classroom supplies, and prepping for the next day. It wasn't unusual for her to leave the school building after sunset. Even at home, she couldn't relax. She'd spend hours scrolling through Pinterest for new teaching ideas or replying to emails until she could barely keep her eyes open. Despite her seemingly tireless efforts, Rebecca was plagued by a constant feeling of inadequacy. No matter how much she did, it never felt like enough. She second-guessed her decisions, worried endlessly about whether her students were learning enough, and berated herself for not finding time to implement all the innovative teaching methods she read about. Rebecca's perfectionism extended beyond her work. Her friendships were strained because she frequently canceled plans, citing her workload. Her sister, Allison, often joked that Rebecca's idea of a break was folding laundry while listening to an educational podcast. And though Rebecca loved teaching, she was starting to resent the constant pressure she felt to do everything perfectly. Physically, her body was beginning to show the toll of her relentless pace. She often woke up with headaches, felt constantly fatigued, and had developed a nagging pain in her shoulders from hunching over her laptop late at night. Despite her exhaustion, she dismissed these symptoms as minor inconveniences. "I'll rest when the school year ends," she told herself, though deep down she knew the cycle would continue. Rebecca's breaking point came during a parent-teacher conference night. She had spent the entire day preparing detailed progress reports for each student, carefully crafting her comments to ensure they were both honest and encouraging. By the time the conferences began, she was running on nothing but adrenaline and caffeine. Midway through her second meeting, Rebecca felt her chest tighten, her vision blurred, and her breathing became shallow. She excused herself, stepping into the hallway, where she leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. It was the first time she had ever experienced a panic attack, and it terrified her. Later that night, as she lay in bed replaying the events of the day, she realized something had to change. If she kept pushing herself like this, she knew she'd burn out completely. But the idea of stepping back, of doing less, felt impossible. "If I don't give 100%, I'm letting everyone down," she thought. The following week, Rebecca shared her experience with her sister Allison, who suggested she see a therapist. "You can't keep running yourself into the ground like this," Allison said. "You need to take care of yourself, Rebecca. You can't keep giving to everyone else and leave nothing for yourself." Reluctantly, Rebecca agreed. That's how she found herself sitting in Dr. Vincent Vale's office a few days later. The room was warm and inviting, with soft lighting, a comfortable couch, and bookshelves lined with titles on psychology and self-care. "I'm here because I don't know how to stop," Rebecca admitted during their first session. I feel like I have to be perfect all the time, and even when I try, it's still not enough. Dr. Vale nodded thoughtfully. Rebecca, it sounds like you've been carrying a lot for a long time. Let's explore where this pressure comes from and how we can help you create space for yourself. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't know what the path ahead would look like, but she was ready to take the first step. Rebecca sat across from Dr. Vale, her hands gripping a paper cup of lukewarm tea she hadn't touched. The office was quiet, with soft, natural light streaming through the windows. Despite the calm surroundings, she felt restless. Opening up about her struggles felt daunting, especially since she had spent so much of her life pretending she had everything under control. I'm not sure where to start, Rebecca said, breaking the silence. Her voice was tinged with exhaustion. Start wherever you feel comfortable, Dr. Vale replied gently. There's no right or wrong place to begin. Rebecca hesitated before speaking. I'm a teacher and I love what I do, but lately it feels like I'm drowning. There's always more to do, more lessons to plan, more papers to grade, more expectations to meet. And no matter how hard I try, it never feels like enough. As she spoke, her words came faster, as if she had been holding them back for years. She described her relentless schedule, her inability to say no, and the guilt that consumed her whenever she considered taking a break. It sounds like you're carrying a heavy load, Dr. Vale said when she finished. And it also sounds like you've been doing so for a long time. Rebecca nodded, her eyes welling up. I don't know how to stop. If I let go even a little, I feel like everything will fall apart. That's a common fear among perfectionists, Dr. Vale said. But the truth is, you can't keep running at this pace without consequences. My goal is to help you find a way to care for yourself without feeling like you're letting others down. Over the next few sessions, Dr. Vale guided Rebecca through an exploration of her past. He asked thoughtful questions about her upbringing, her relationships, and the beliefs she held about herself. Rebecca spoke about her childhood, where her parents' praise often centered on her achievements. They were loving, but it was always about what I did, not who I was, she explained. If I brought home an A, they'd celebrate. But if I got a B, it was, what happened? Dr. Vale nodded. It sounds like you learned early on that your worth was tied to your performance. That's a powerful belief to carry into adulthood. Rebecca also revealed her struggles with setting boundaries. I hate saying no, she admitted. Whether it's a colleague asking for help or a parent needing extra feedback, I feel like I have to say yes. Otherwise, I'm failing them. Dr. Vale introduced her to the concept of people-pleasing as a coping mechanism. Perfectionism and people-pleasing often go hand in hand, he explained. You've been conditioned to prioritize others' needs above your own, but that's not sustainable. True self-care starts with recognizing that your needs are just as important. This realization hit Rebecca hard. She had never thought of self-care as a necessity, let alone as something she deserved. Dr. Vale encouraged Rebecca to start small, suggesting she set aside 10 minutes each day for herself. It could be anything, reading a book, taking a walk, or simply sitting in silence, he said, but Rebecca struggled to follow through. It feels selfish, she confessed during one session. How can I take time for myself when there's so much to do? Dr. Vale gently challenged this belief. Rebecca, self-care isn't selfish, it's essential. If you're constantly running on empty, you can't show up fully for your students, your family, or yourself. He also introduced Rebecca to the concept of imperfection as a form of self-care. What would happen if you let something be good enough instead of perfect? He asked. The idea made Rebecca uncomfortable. I don't think I can do that, she admitted. Why not try it as an experiment, Dr. Vale suggested. Pick one thing, just one, and see what happens if you aim for good enough. Rebecca decided to test this idea with her lesson planning. Instead of spending hours perfecting every detail, she allowed herself to stop after completing the basics. At first, she felt uneasy, convinced that her students would notice the difference. But to her surprise, the lessons went just as smoothly as before. "This is going to sound strange," she told Dr. Vale during their next session, "but it was almost freeing. I had time to breathe, and my students didn't seem to care that the lesson wasn't perfect." Dr. Vale smiled. "That's the beauty of imperfection. It creates space for you to focus on what really matters." Encouraged by this small victory, Rebecca began experimenting with other forms of self-care. She started going to bed earlier, even if it meant leaving some emails unanswered. She said no to an extra committee assignment, something she had never done before. And she carved out time on weekends to reconnect with friends, something she hadn't prioritized in years. As Rebecca continued to practice self-care, she noticed subtle but significant changes. Her headaches became less frequent, her energy levels improved, and she began to feel more present in her daily life. One evening, while enjoying dinner with her sister Alison, Rebecca reflected on her progress. "I used to think self-care was a luxury," she said, "but now I see it's what allows me to keep going." Alison smiled. "I've been trying to tell you that for years," she teased. Rebecca laughed, but she knew it was true. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful, not just about her career, but about her ability to create a life that felt balanced and fulfilling. Several months into therapy, Rebecca had started to see the benefits of prioritizing self-care. She was sleeping better, her headaches were less frequent, and she felt more present with her students and her family. But she was about to face her biggest challenge yet, a situation that would put everything she had learned to the test. One Friday morning, the school principal, Ms. Callahan, called Rebecca into her office. "Rebecca, you've been doing such an amazing job with your students," Ms. Callahan began. "We've decided to nominate you for the district's Teacher of the Year award." Rebecca felt a mix of pride and panic. While the nomination was an honor, it came with a daunting set of requirements. She would need to compile a detailed portfolio, including examples of her lesson plans, student work, and a reflective essay about her teaching philosophy, all within 2 weeks. As Ms. Callahan went over the details, Rebecca nodded, outwardly calm, but inwardly spiraling. "How am I going to do all of this on top of everything else?" she thought. By the time she returned to her classroom, Rebecca's old perfectionist tendencies were in full swing. She wanted every detail of her portfolio to be flawless, from the design of her lesson plans to the wording of her essay. She envisioned late nights, skipped meals, and sacrificing her weekends to get everything just right. But then, something unexpected happened. Rebecca remembered a conversation she'd had with Dr. Vale during a recent session. "Rebecca," he had said, "perfectionism is like a runaway train. It feels like you have to keep going faster and faster, but the truth is, you can pull the brake at any time. The question is, what are you willing to let go of to protect your well-being?" Rebecca decided to test that theory. Instead of immediately diving into the work, she sat down and made a plan. She listed all the tasks she needed to complete and prioritized the ones that were most important. She also made a bold decision. She would dedicate no more than 2 hours a day to the portfolio. Outside of that time, she would focus on her students, her self-care, and her personal life. Rebecca also reached out for help, something she had rarely done in the past. She asked her colleagues for advice on crafting the portfolio and even enlisted a close friend to proofread her essay. "It doesn't have to be perfect," she reminded herself. "It just has to be honest." At first, sticking to this approach was difficult. There were moments when Rebecca felt the urge to spend hours tweaking her work, convinced that it wasn't good enough. But each time she paused and asked herself, "Is this worth sacrificing my health for?" As the deadline approached, Rebecca's anxiety began to creep back in. What if her portfolio wasn't as polished as the other nominees? What if she didn't win? On the day she was supposed to submit her materials, Rebecca sat in her living room, staring at the final draft of her portfolio. She could feel the familiar pull of perfectionism, the voice in her head telling her to go through it one more time, to fix every tiny imperfection. But then she took a deep breath and closed her laptop. "It's good enough," she said aloud, even though the words felt foreign. Rebecca submitted the portfolio and immediately felt a wave of relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was done, and for the first time, she didn't feel like her worth was tied to the outcome. A few weeks later, Rebecca received an email from the district office. She had been selected as one of the top 3 finalists for Teacher of the Year. Part of the final evaluation included giving a short presentation to a panel of judges about her teaching philosophy. On the day of the presentation, Rebecca felt nervous but surprisingly grounded. Instead of obsessing over every word, she focused on connecting with the judges and sharing her genuine passion for teaching. When the presentation was over, one of the judges approached her. "Your dedication to your students is inspiring," he said. "It's clear that you care deeply about their growth and well-being." Rebecca didn't win the award, but she didn't feel disappointed. For the first time, she realized that the recognition wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that she had honored her own well-being throughout the process. Later that evening, Rebecca reflected on the experience during her therapy session with Dr. Vale. "I didn't win, but I feel lighter," she said. "I didn't sacrifice myself to prove my worth. And that feels like a win in itself." Dr. Vale smiled. "Rebecca, this is the essence of self-care. It's not about achieving perfection. It's about protecting your energy and showing up as your best self, even when things aren't perfect." That night, Rebecca went to bed early, something she hadn't done in years. As she lay under the covers, she thought about how far she had come. She still loved teaching, but she no longer felt the need to be everything to everyone. She had learned to set boundaries, to ask for help, and to prioritize herself, and that had made all the difference. For the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt at peace. She had faced her greatest challenge and come out stronger, not because she was perfect, but because she had learned to let go. In the weeks following the Teacher of the Year presentation, Rebecca felt a shift in her life. She hadn't won the award, but it no longer felt like a failure. Instead, it marked a turning point, a moment where she had prioritized her well-being without compromising her integrity or passion for teaching. Her mornings, once rushed and chaotic, had become an opportunity for calm and intentionality. Rebecca now started her day with a short walk around her neighborhood, enjoying the crisp Denver air before heading to school. She had traded her endless to-do lists for a simpler, more sustainable routine. 3 key goals for the day, and the rest could wait. At school, Rebecca felt more present with her students. Without the constant weight of perfectionism, she found herself enjoying spontaneous moments in the classroom, laughing at a silly joke a student made, engaging in creative activities that didn't have to be meticulously planned, and allowing her students the freedom to learn through trial and error. Her evenings were no longer dominated by work. Rebecca set a firm boundary: no schoolwork after 6 p.m. Instead, she used that time to reconnect with friends, catch up on her favorite shows, or simply relax with a cup of tea and a good book. One night, as she sat on her couch with her sister Allison, Rebecca reflected on her journey. "I used to think self-care was something I didn't have time for," she said. "But now, I see it's what gives me the energy to do everything else. It's not selfish. It's necessary." Allison smiled. "I've been trying to tell you that for years, but I'm glad you finally figured it out." In his office, Dr. Vale often thought about Rebecca's story. For him, it was a testament to the power of small, intentional changes. Rebecca's journey shows us that perfectionism and self-care don't have to be at odds, he said during a podcast episode. In fact, self-care is the foundation that allows us to strive for excellence without losing ourselves in the process. He explained how Rebecca's case highlighted a common struggle among perfectionists: the belief that self-worth is tied to achievement. When we equate our value with how much we do or how well we do it, we set ourselves up for burnout, Dr. Vale said. But when we learn to prioritize self-care, we create the space to show up as our best selves, not perfect, but whole. Dr. Vale emphasized the importance of reframing self-care as an act of strength rather than indulgence. Self-care isn't about escaping responsibility, he said. It's about recharging, so you can take on those responsibilities with clarity, focus, and resilience. To the viewers of Rebecca's story, Dr. Vale offered an invitation. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Where are you running on empty? What would happen if you gave yourself permission to rest, to recharge, to let something be good enough instead of perfect? He encouraged them to start small. You don't have to overhaul your life overnight. Begin with one act of self-care. Whether it's saying no to something that drains you, taking a short walk, or simply pausing to breathe during a busy day. These small steps add up, and they create the foundation for lasting change. Rebecca's transformation didn't just impact her, it inspired others around her. Her students noticed her renewed energy and positivity, and it reflected in their own enthusiasm for learning. Her colleagues began asking her about her strategies for managing stress, and she became an unofficial advocate for teacher wellness at her school. One of the most meaningful moments came during a parent-teacher conference. A parent thanked Rebecca for her dedication to their child's growth and added, "You seem so happy and balanced. It's inspiring to see a teacher who truly loves what they do." Those words stayed with Rebecca. She realized that by caring for herself, she had not only improved her own life, but also become a better teacher, friend, and sister. Rebecca's story is a reminder for all perfectionists. Self-care isn't a weakness. It's a powerful tool that allows us to live fully, love deeply, and give our best without sacrificing ourselves in the process. Dr. Vale closed the chapter with a reflection. The world doesn't need perfect people. It needs present people. And the only way to be truly present is to care for yourself first. Remember, you can't pour from an empty cup, but when you take the time to refill it, everyone around you benefits. Dr. Vale turned to his audience with a simple question. What's one thing you can do today to care for yourself? Maybe it's taking a break, asking for help, or saying no to something that doesn't serve you. Whatever it is, take that step. You deserve it. With that, he offered a gentle reminder. You are enough, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And when you take care of yourself, you create the space to let that truth shine.